Going to go ahead and call this work session to order on AO 2019-91, and we also have an S version that was given to us this morning, or today, whatever. So let's go ahead and do introductions, starting with you, Pete.
Pete Peterson.
Crystal Kennedy. Austin Davidson.
John Weddleton.
Forrest Dunbar.
Felix Rivera.
Michael Tierney.
Deanne Fetco, Health Department. Michelle Smith, Animal Control Advisory Board.
Brett Dice.
Christopher Constant.
All right. So we had a health policy committee meeting on this ordinance, although we didn't have the S version before us. We did not have a quorum at that policy meeting for a variety of reasons. So as not to lengthen the debate on Tuesday, I thought we'd go over some of the more controversial or sticking points that came up at the committee meeting. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Animal Control so that we can go over those.
Yes, one of the questions was dealing with the shelter and our examples of inadequate shelter, which is on page 3, line 14, where it says long-term confinement over 30 days in an enclosed shelter not specifically designed for that purpose. And this was in part by a case where some dogs were in a Durango for a period of time. And this was hoping to help partially address that, as well as some other concerns were brought forth by Straw for Dogs and other organizations where people just put a piece of tin up on a couple of sawhorses and leave an animal underneath there. So this covers some of that. Well, the questions that were posed on Wednesday was, does this leave a lot of loopholes? Is 30 days too long? Or what if somebody does it for 14 days, takes the dog inside for a day, and then comes back and repeats it? And he answered, the short answer is yes, there probably is some loopholes in there, but this is also listed as an example of inadequate shelter. So after conferring with legal, this is kind of like the ceiling, the floor, not the ceiling on this. Now, one suggestion that was made by our Animal Control Advisory Board was perhaps we substitute the word continual in there.
I'm sorry,
page 3, line 15. And so since this is just an example, it's not the do-all, be-all, if you will. If we were to swap out the term long-term confinement over 30 days and substitute that with the word continual confinement, I think that gets the example across of what we're saying. Is you can't.
Can I say something?
Yeah, let's go, Davidson.
I actually think that would make it worse. Because
okay.
I think right now, first of all, these are just examples, so
Correct.
It doesn't really matter anyway. But I think it's better to say, if you have a dog in there for 16 days and you take it on a walk and then you put it back for 14, you don't want to have to start that clock over again. So I think the suggestion you're bringing forward would do that.
Well, continual as opposed to the word continuous, because continuous would mean it's repeated. In the legal definition of continuous, happen repeatedly, often in a bad or annoying way, but there can be intervals.
I think it's confusing. I think
okay.
continual makes it think it's continuous.
Okay.
So.
And I'm sorry, I don't see any change on, I guess.
We didn't make a change. It was just for discussion because
Okay.
that was what was brought up, but we really don't have a recommendation per se. Just over enough for discussion because, like you say, as it stands, we're just saying it's an example, and legal is saying, well, we're not tied to. This is just one example of what could be.
Can I just follow up quickly? So
Yeah, sure.
I also don't know why you're even saying 30 days. Why don't you just say, either long term, and then it's up to the interpretation of legal and animal control as to what's humane or not. Or that's the problem. Is that what you're saying?
That's a great idea. Delete over 30 days from that sentence. You've got your word.
That's what I would do.
Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thank you. I'm a little out of order here, but at some point when it's appropriate, I'd like you to tell me why we need subsection 2 there, lines 4 through 14. I think all the stuff that's under 1 covers it. And the implication is any of these things under 2 are not adequate. And if they provide the shelter, the dryness, and the hygiene and everything that you've got under section 1, how the dog owner gets there to do that, it's none of our business. We want the dog to be safe and hygiene protect from the weather and stuff. And why an adequate shelter underneath of a deck couldn't be okay escapes me. So when it's appropriate for discussion, I'd like to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Before we get to that point, does the Department of Law want to add anything to this discussion on the long-term confinement?
No, this is Jester Willoughby from Department of Law. I think Mr. Tierney said it accurately that there's a lot of discretion here. So in terms of wordsmithing, it's open to AHD or assembly, what words they prefer.
Okay, great. On this one, Mr. Constant? Yeah.
Just to Ms. Willoughby, does that discretion then take away, or the not defining that discretion, take away from the department's ability to implement it? Like, I imagine I'm hearing, if it's too generic, then the hearing officer is going to say, how would they know? What is the standard? How is this implemented? And so how would we know what the definition of that flexibility is?
Well, through the chair, I think we're actually several steps down from what consists of inadequate shelter in the definition of shelter, right? So we're within shelter, and as Assemblymember Dyson pointed out, the first part of the definition addresses different minimum standards, and then this second subsection gives examples. So these are themselves illustrations to illustrate what inadequate shelter is. So I think, and I'm not sitting in the AHO office, but I think there's ample illustration as to what direction the health department is going with this.
I hear you there, but I would ask, like, if we don't have some time-specific element, and what we're going to do instead is depend upon the judgment of the department, which I like, but I don't know that the record is. How does that standard get established? Where does that standard? That's the question.
Well, I think that the challenge for the department is that when they're considering adequacy of shelter, it's a holistic analysis, not just taking into consideration what maybe the shelter is, but the weather conditions and other stuff going on, and also the variable of what animal it's for. So it's one of the challenges, I think, of enforcing the code in this area.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Constant. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'm kind of in line with Fred here, and I guess I hadn't read this carefully enough, but I'm a little concerned about some of the class implications of what we're saying in number 2. Particularly, we're saying that shelter, a mobile home, is not okay. So someone who lives in a mobile home can't leave their dog there? Or am I misunderstanding?
It's underneath.
Underneath steps, decks. And this would be opposed to, I mean, if you built a dog shelter and it happened to be underneath a deck, then the shelter would be fine. What this is trying to imply is your deck is not your animal's shelter. Or if the dog is left to live underneath the mobile home, not in the mobile home.
It's a little weird because in number 1 it says, you know, a weatherproof structure with a solid floor raised above the ground that has dry bedding and has shade or whatever. So that could be a set of steps. So I guess I'm just confused.
Could be under a trailer house too.
Exactly. So there seems to be some inconsistency, I think.
Okay.
Go ahead, Chris, before we start.
Actually,
Yeah.
sorry, I had Mr. Whittleton. Did you want to respond to this, or did you have a different
I
point?
guess I'm beating it up here because I go under deck. If I had a dog, my deck's on the second floor,
Right.
and I'd set up a structure, I guess, there. But it'd be an awesome place for the dog. So deck. So reading it, when I read it the first time, I think this is nice. Let's put it in colloquial terms that normal people can understand with these examples. So that was good. But now as we dig into it, I go, well, wait a minute. What if your trailer is 4 feet off the ground? And there's a lot of room for it. I mean, I don't think that's what you mean, but in a way, but someone reading this would go, well, shoot, this won't work. So I can't have something like that. So it does send us the wrong path.
So I want Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Constant, and I want to get the health department's viewpoint.
I thought it was a constant for a minute. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I tend to lean towards what Fred is saying in terms I'm pretty laissez-faire when it comes to this kind of thing, so long as you're providing these you know, the heat and that kind of thing. But I am also sensitive to the fact that this came out of a particular case in my district that got a lot of publicity, and you know, you say you shouldn't let hard cases become good, hard cases make bad law. But I think there's an argument made that wasn't a hard case. It seemed like she should have had her animal removed. But I'm wondering where in here, what provision in here would have prevented that? Because unless I'm misreading it,
One little one, 1B little one.
had sufficient ventilation. She rolled down the window on her Durango and it was ventilated. It was dry. She cleaned it. I mean, there were all these claims that she didn't. But if she was cleaning it, I mean, what here? The examples you gave, I thought one of the examples would be like long term in a car, but it's actually not, right? It's not one of the, you can't be underneath a motor vehicle. But if you kept the dog in a SUV long term, which of these provisions would have prevented that?
Well, it was more covered under the example of inadequate shelter, which would be long-term confinement, or in an enclosed shelter not specifically designed for that purpose, which a vehicle is not specifically designed to house an animal.
Which
It'd be page 3, line G. Line 14, subparagraph G.
Enclosed shelter not specifically designed for that purpose. Yeah, I guess so. I guess so. But then if that's the case, then like G kind of subsumes almost all the others too, right? Metal barrels aren't designed for this purpose.
But barrels are used by mushers, but they use plastic barrels.
Yeah.
Because the metal stays cold.
Okay, I just, let me think about it some more. Thank you.
So what I see here isn't the reflection of one case. What I see in this list, and maybe it's inaptly written for the purposes we're setting out to do here, is a kind of a catalog of the many and numerous cases over time that have provided challenges to the department in how to manage issues of dogs poorly housed. And so whether there's a class dimension to this or in that language, I'm not sure, but what I see here are very likely tied to the very numerous incidences that the department has had to deal with. And so if there's a better way to say it, great, but what we want to do is reflect accurately the table of problems that are unresolved that the department comes upon on a regular basis.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. So I'm going to turn it over to the health department to respond to this. Then I have Mr. Peterson, then Mr. Dyson.
Okay. Well, as you said, the cars in the Durango was one case, but there have been other photos where, from just citizens and nonprofit organizations, we'll take a picture of a dog under a shelter. But if an animal control officer was out there and it's a sunny day, that's not an inappropriate shelter at that moment. But as soon as it starts to rain or it starts to wind or it starts to snow, and again, they don't go out and do checks on people's homes. They wait until they receive a call for a welfare check. Then they can go out and they can say, well, you need to get it in a proper shelter. But the neighbors will tell you. I mean, there are folks, there are indoor dogs and there's outdoor dogs. We struggle with that. Well, should we define an outdoor dog? We couldn't come up with a suitable definition for that. But there are folks that leave their dogs out continuous or continual. And we're saying you should have a proper shelter for that animal, not rely on it to go under the car or go under a piece of tin on some sawhorses. And you're not there if it rains to let it in, or if it snows, or if it's windy. So, and our animal control officers do use a lot of discretion when they go out. I mean, I will say that they look at is the dog emaciated? Does it have water? Things of that nature. But they would be the first to tell you. And they also turn around and say, here's a card, Straw for Dogs. If you call them, they'll come out and build you a shelter. But we are just trying to cover some of the situations that have occurred, and we'd like the public to know, hey, you don't just the cardboard box or the fact that you have a deck that the dog can crawl under is really not sufficient shelter.
And many of these did come out during public testimony and from the partner agencies that these were really important elements to include also helps the animal control officer know that these things are inappropriate.
Thank you. I'll add you to the list. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm looking at number D, animal carriers or crates, because, I mean, I know if you just set the crate outside in the winter, obviously it wouldn't provide adequate shelter for the dog, but I know many people whose dogs are trained to spend a large percentage of their time in those crates, and they feel safe and protected and in those crates, and sometimes they'll go into those crates on their own just because that's where they feel most relaxed or whatever. And so I'm, as far as I know that we're talking about keeping them out of the elements, but I know many people that use those crates as their dog's main place to spend time.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, I don't want my passion to get away from me, but it's almost unimaginable to me that Alaskans would want to that a doghouse they constructed was not specifically designed for that purpose. We really want to say that you can only allow one that's designed for it. I made a wonderful doghouse out of my neighbor's piano shipping crate that was not only really neat architecturally, it was really fun. It looked like a little castle. But I think we got it here under number one. We told what we want. To go arbitrarily saying that Alaskans can't repurpose things that meet our criteria for what we want. And that's a very strange and unacceptable deal there to say it's got to have been designed for that purpose.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Weddleton.
No, I think I'm done, thanks.
Okay. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, that does raise a question. If we wanted to have the best of both worlds, it could be that we rely on Section 1, and then the Animal Care Advisory Board interprets that to mean there are these number of things that we would suggest as guidance to the animal care officers and also to the public, right? And so, because effectively you do achieve the legal standard under the Section 1, but the Section 2 is illustrative, and so maybe then the staff could illustrate it in a way that achieves the same goal, right? And so maybe that's the path through there.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Go ahead.
If I can just respond to the thing here, when we discussed it, it was never the intent. I mean, when it says design, you could absolutely take a Durango, take the wheels off, put it in your backyard, remove the seats, and repurpose it as a dog shelter and build a very nice windbreak into it and make an exit. I mean, we understand that, but we were really looking at, okay, if somebody just grabbed an object, if you will, and used it as a shelter without specifically designing it for that purpose.
No, you want it to specifically meet the criteria under paragraph 1.
Correct.
Which is very well done.
Which all of paragraph 2 has to meet with paragraph 1 as well. They're just examples.
Nope.
And
Thank you.
If I can add, I think what we saw in other jurisdictions when we were researching other states and municipalities that had defined shelter, a lot of them did provide examples, just like we've included here, with the intent of, I think, Mr. Littleton, you had mentioned it, sort of providing this information to the public in a very accessible way of saying, here's, Section 1 is the very clear legal standard, and then Section 2 are things that have been determined to not meet that legal standard in an effort to make the law accessible to the general public. And so I think that's what those examples are intending to do, so that it's really making it clear. And again, examples of inadequate shelter. This is not intended to be a comprehensive list of everything that would or would not meet the criteria in Section 1. And I did wanted to mention quickly your point, Mr. Peterson, about crates. And I think the distinction would be, yes, a lot of people use crates inside their home, think, as providing a safe space for their dogs very successfully, and I think that is something that a lot of folks utilize. I think the thing that becomes challenging is if those crates are being utilized to provide dogs outside with shelter, because often those types of carriers, if it's just a wire carrier, there's no windbreak, there's no shelter from the water, there's nothing there aside from just a space. Even the airline carriers, sometimes they'll have those holes on the side, so they don't really provide the basic requirements of shelter that we want to see a dog who was stuck outside with no access inside a home to have access to.
Thank you. All right, so I think we've made our points on this one. Yeah, you have something, Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess I'm still with Fred, and I guess I'm confused because your examples back are, oh, well, that deck would be fine because we'd go out there and we'd see that that isn't a problem. Or, oh,
well, not that deck would be fine, but if you built a doghouse underneath.
Right. Oh, it's not actually, it doesn't fit. Oh, it isn't specifically designed, but that would be okay because we would use our discretion to see that, oh, but it was changed. So I guess what I'm worried about is this proposed language might put you in a bind to not actually use your discretion, whereas if you only had number one, you could use your discretion. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, what are you guys worried about? Are you worried about using your discretion and people don't think it's legal and getting legal challenges? Or why not just have number one and even add a humane standard? Have a thing that gives you guys discretion to make a decision about whether it's a safe space for an animal. Why do you have to list all these things? I just don't see the need for that.
We've just bumped up against it in cases where it isn't exactly clear. And we're just trying to make it more clear for officers, for the public, so they know that these things would not be.
But no member of the public who's a negligent dog owner is going to look this up. I mean, that's not going to happen. So it's going to be me who's like, oh, is it okay if my dogs who are totally spoiled are allowed to do, so I don't even think that really helps. So does it boil down to, if there's a legal argument, you want to have cover? And then if so, give yourself complete discretion in number one, and you'll have that cover. But I think you're going to back yourselves into these things that people are going to actually have more arguments here that are confusing. So yeah, I think I'm just with Fred, and if you needed more discretion, give yourselves that.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton, then Ms. Kennedy.
So looking at this, I think following up on all these points is you're kind of describing, I guess, the beginning, suitable for species, age, condition, breed, etc. Nowhere in here does it say you really want the animal to be healthy. And maybe it's not crisply said, that's the main goal, right? You want this animal to be healthy. And somewhere in here, maybe add a 6 or make it number 1.
Well, this describes the shelter, if it could serve. There is a definition for humane care, which is also under
maybe that's
code,
our
humane
comment.
care and sanitation. You have to meet that criteria as well, regardless of shelter.
Okay.
So maybe that's
it.
covered.
Yeah, because I look for something like, I'll have to look at that. Because that would give you the out, like that Durango with all those emails, it sounded like it's strictly met code. But you could say, but it's really making these dogs unhealthy, so we're not going to allow it.
Well, if I may, every welfare check done on those dogs were healthy.
Yeah.
And
There should
I
be a
think
bond.
that,
Well, then
that
maybe
was
it's
the
fine.
problem.
I mean,
in terms of taking action.
if the dogs are healthy and they have ventilation and they have whatever, I
In a
mean,
dark room with light only once every.
well, then they're not. It's not humane, and so that gets back to the point of they didn't satisfy the standard.
So is the humane section here, or is it not included in this ordinance?
It's already code, sir.
It's already code.
So
Okay.
that's not in here, the humane.
It's already code.
Is it in our documents here?
It's not, because this just covers the local changes.
So
Maybe you could email that just.
yeah, either you send it to the clerk to send it to us, or just send it to us directly. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple comments too. And I look at that section 2 as being good administrative guidelines, maybe to help with the process of determining really what the risk to the dog is. So I would be for eliminating that and just sticking with number 1. However, in that, is there other language that talks about the actual safety? Because I noticed in this particular part, the shelter's talking about sound and weatherproof structure, it's gotta be clean, it's gotta maintain sanitary conditions, but there's not a real reference in there specifically to safety, even though it looks like in section 2, you were trying to cover that by saying that shelters surrounded by debris that may endanger the dog. So maybe one thing to do would be add that element of, just safe surroundings or something like that into that first section. But leave off this second section, because I can see in every one of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, there could be an exception that would be allowable, or would be considered adequate. So, I certainly see where you're trying to give yourselves examples, but obviously there are examples of where those wouldn't be relevant, wouldn't pertain. So, but anyway, again, kind of goes back to my question. Is there other language anywhere else that says anything about shelters needing to also be safe, not just adequate and clean, but also safe?
The definition of humane care, which is in the code, it says humane care or treatment of humane manner means the care and treatment of an animal, including but not limited to providing the animal with 1, safe and necessary control, confinement, and appropriate space. 2, adequate veterinary treatment, wholesome food and water. And 3, heat, ventilation, and sanitary shelter from wind, temperatures, precipitation, and sun conditions detrimental to its health, all of which are consistent with or dictated by the animal's normal requirements, veterinary needs, feeding habits, its condition, size, species, age, and breed. So there is.
So you're saying that all those components are kind of wrapped up in that concept of what safe should mean.
Care and sanitation.
And I guess I was thinking more like the absence of hazards. So anyway, because it seems like that's what you were trying to get at in E2E, being and not having debris surrounding them that might endanger them. Anyway, I'll have to think about that.
Thank you, Ms.
Can I say one more thing?
Sure.
I know we're trying to. 1B, little I, if you're going to not have 2, I think you should incorporate humane just generally into 1 so that we have that catch-all that allows you the discretion. But I think has sufficient ventilation and light, given what Chris said. I don't see light mentioned anywhere. So you could have a dog in a dark room that has ventilation and bedding, but that's super weird, right?
It's under V.
Is it?
On page 3.
Oh, it's on the other
Yeah.
page. Got
And
it.
Mr. Chair.
Perfect. Thank
Sure,
you.
Mr. Chris.
I don't know that the department will be coming up with any more changes for this, because it's entered and it's up for a vote, right? And so if we want to make changes, it's up to us.
Yeah, or we can ask them. Yeah.
I just need to make a departure. The S version that was distributed, it was not submitted to the clerk's office, and I don't think it's necessary. It's addressing some Scrivener errors that are in the AO that can be addressed outside of the assembly process. It's like a subsection numbering issue. So the health department can either delay the AO, or assembly members are welcome to make amendments.
So it's on for Tuesday introduction? Or
No,
vote?
it's for vote on Tuesday.
Oh,
It's
it's
introduced.
so soon. I don't feel like. Okay.
We had a work session.
This is the work session.
The committee.
Yeah, but 4 of us were here, and it just got introduced. I mean, we might have to just give it some time.
Well, and
Yeah, Mr. Peterson.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been spending all our time on that one section. I'm back on page 12, and they're talking about someone having to come up with
Yes.
a bond payment or they forfeit the dog.
Yep, and if I could just add in, Mr. Peterson, that was the second section that I was planning on going over, but I obviously underestimated the amount of time that we needed for this, as sometimes happens.
So my question was, how much is the bond usually?
It depends on how many animals are involved and if there's veterinary care that's part of it, but it would definitely be a daily boarding fee, which is $14 a day for dogs, less for cats.
All right, thank you.
And if I might just briefly, we went through that at the committee, and that was only for dogs that are,
Protective custody for cruelty charges.
right, it's a very narrow bandwidth, it's not all dogs or.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to wrap things up because we have to move on. So am I getting a pretty clear consensus that we don't feel comfortable voting on this on Tuesday?
Maybe some changes.
Some changes.
Could I
Can we make
suggest-
amendments by Tuesday? Or?
I would rather, can
Okay.
I make a suggestion?
Sure, Ms. Quinn Davidson.
That Suzanne and I make a little subcommittee and work with you guys and some of the folks who weighed in and see if we have changes and work collaboratively to see if we can come up with something and bring back to the group. Is there any urgency? How's your guys' timeline on?
We've been working on this for some time.
Yeah.
There's, before winter would definitely be good, but we'd rather get it right.
And just so everyone in the room knows, a little ironic, but the administration, when I discussed this with them, they told me that this was the easy version. They actually have another ordinance making more changes to animal code that's coming up that's supposed to be more controversial than this one. So,
Okay, interesting.
Cat
Well, then I
license.
shouldn't vote. I mean, I don't know if Suzanne's available, but it could be someone else too, or another person if you want. Does anybody else want to be part of that?
Yeah, I definitely, animal issues are close to my heart.
So you would like to be part of this? Okay, so maybe the three of us if Suzanne wants to, if not me and Chris.
great. Okay, well then we'll go ahead just tentatively plan on postponing and working on this in a small working group. With that, I'll go ahead and close this work session. Thank you.